To some, it's known as Chelsea by the Sea. More appropriately, it is Chelsea on the rocks. Chelsea, Massachusetts is not the worst city in the country, but it is certainly the most destitute. Its main distinction is it's the only city in the United States where democracy has been suspended. This once proud colonial trading post, settled in 1624, went so morally and fiscally sour that the state was forced to take it over, place it in receivership, and deny it the right to govern itself. If you think this story is just another example of urban mismanagement, try these for some vital statistics. The last 5 mayors are accused of bribery. 3 are doing time, along with a number of cops. Chelsea didn't fall into bankruptcy. It was pushed. Chelsea is just a few miles from the cradle of the American Revolution, downtown Boston. Just cross over the Tobin Bridge and you are there. 1.8 square miles, 28,000 people, just minutes from our 18th century cradle to our 20th century grave.
This city is mismanaged.
And if they get away with this, they'll get away with everything.
By 1991, all that was left was the cackling of a discredited local government.
We want to govern ourselves.
Rich in rhetoric, but dead broke.
I blame the chief financial officer.
The schools closed and padlocked.
Our education we're talking about.
Reserves, zero.
We don't care about
We
education.
risk our lives going through smoke. We can't see the hand in front of our face. We went with
The
3
deficit,
men across
$10 million.
They want to reduce us from 20 to 14 men. We'll risk our life to save a bill like that.
From a few hundred feet, Chelsea is almost quaint. From the street, you see the sores, the decay, the drugs, the violence. The last new school was built in 1909. The courthouse has been condemned, a foul, dank cesspool that still houses police headquarters.
It's in need of a paint job.
The vice squad works out of the cells. By September 1991, Butchie Brennan had become mayor of an empty shell. In desperation, the city was handed over to Governor William Weld, who placed Chelsea in receivership and called in Jim Carlin, a self-made millionaire, and gave him a mission. Do what it takes to put Chelsea back together again. The last man to hold such authority over Chelsea was George III in 1776. Who did you have to play ball with in order to get things done?
Nobody.
You mean you just issued edicts? With a stroke of the pen, you said, let it be.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
His thing was, look, it's either my way or it's bankruptcy.
Frank Murphy and Tom Lassiter are Chelsea firefighters who say Carlin was a tyrant from day one.
We're the only segment of the whole United States that doesn't have the right to representation.
In Carlin's opinion, democracy ended at the Tobin Bridge, where Chelsea began.
Overtime over there is $800,000.
His first edict was to end overtime for city workers. It saved $1 million, a tenth of the deficit. The firefighters were furious. He demanded layoffs and an end to one of their most questionable perks, unlimited paid sick leave. Former Mayor Butchie Brennan said when it came to firefighters, the city always caved in. Were you guilty of that too yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Caving into the firefighters, for example.
I caved in enough. There was a lot of pressure put on me.
How did they ever get unlimited sick leave?
One of the mayors put it in as a golden handshake, a plum, and I can't tell you how many times we went to court to get that out. Unlimited sick time. Guys were out 3, 4, 5 years playing softball, hitting home runs, and we'd take films and we'd take pictures and we'd try to fight them, and we were very unsuccessful.
All lies.
A couple of guys would
All
take
lies.
sick leave for...
There was no sick leave abuse here. That was all made up stuff.
Made up or not, Jim Carlin got rid of it. Could you have done this as an elected official, do you think?
No.
Could it have been possible?
No.
Why don't the politicians just do it?
Because they have to, in the near future, run for the office that they're in or for another office. And when you cut programs and when you cut personnel, you make people mad. You make people unhappy. And what elected officials want to do is make as many people as happy as possible so that they'll manifest that happiness in their reelection.
I agree with Jim Carlin. I certainly didn't have the guts I thought I had the guts, and when push come to shove, I caved in too. I couldn't, it's hard.
Digital Equipment Company, the second largest computer company in the world, lays off 30,000 people. Wang Laboratories up here in Lowell lays off 25,000 people. IBM lays off 100,000 people. And there's not a word. Try to lay off 2 firemen. I mean, you'd think the world was going to come to an end.
For the record, this was no goof-off fire department. It's one of the busiest in the country, using outdated and dangerous equipment, as this home video shows. The firefighters say the overtime expenses were just a small part of Chelsea's collapse.
It was politics in Chelsea that drove the city into receivership and the undercurrent of the corruption.
Corruption was not an undercurrent, it was a way of life. Mayors, aldermen, city officials of all kinds were on the tape. Carlin was barely in his job as Czar of Chelsea when an FBI investigation produced evidence that 8 police officers, including 3 different heads of the Vice Squad, had either been in the gambling business or were taking bribes. Mayor after mayor was suspected of taking bribes. 4 admitted it. 3 are now doing time, including Butchie Brennan, who's under house arrest. Was it hard as mayor to avoid payoffs of one kind or another?
Yes, it was hard to avoid somebody doing something for you and then later on expecting you to see it their way.
You know, they used to always say when I was a kid, a mayor, why would a man become mayor of the city of Chelsea for $10,000? And he used to always say, well, because the tips were good.
And that's the truth.
And that's what happened.
You took some payoffs yourself, didn't you?
I was convicted of 1 count of obstruction of justice. When the question was put to me, did anyone ever give you money or sell tickets for your fundraisers that you didn't tell? And I lied. I said no. And in fact, that had happened.
Why? Why did you take it? Why did you lie?
I lied because I didn't expect that question, and I knew down deep people had come up to me and said, good luck. I had fundraisers, and people would say, good luck, that famous handshake. And I had a fear, which
Handshake with a few bucks in there.
Sure.
The Chelsea Record defends the city. It says under similar scrutiny, most towns would come out just as bad. But Josh Resnick, a former reporter and Chelsea native, says bribery was a basic expectation of city officials.
It's very hard to ascertain who exactly paid them the money, but the money came from what we called Fifth Street. It came from our one-man crime wave, Sammy Berkowitz. He was the titular head of a gambling program throughout the city.
Sammy Berkowitz may not look like a godfather, but he is a legend. A former cab driver, one of the biggest property owners and proud owner of the Grub and Pub, Chelsea's Rainbow Room. Berkowitz has a number of convictions, but somehow managed to get a presidential pardon from Ronald Reagan. That was for bookmaking and stealing a truckload of sneakers. A few months after his pardon, he was arrested and charged with bookmaking, and later he was indicted on charges of paying off the police.
He was the man. He ran the city. He was the de facto mayor of the city of Chelsea.
Is he a rich man?
He's fabulously wealthy. Sam Berkowitz is a man who has $50 million.
Why would he bother with a place like the Grub and Pub?
The Grub and Pub that's his corner office. That's his city hall. He's seated there every day, smoking Pall Malls, drinking Great Western champagne out of the small bottles, and playing $100 games of gin rummy. That's Sammy Berkowitz.
The payoffs not only went to politicians, but to the Vice Squad, to lay off the various activities of Mr. Berkowitz and his friends. The Vice Squad, the police Vice Squad,
Absolutely insane.
took weekends off.
Yeah, That's right. The Vice Squad didn't work on weekends. I mean, that's laughable. But it's even more laughable when you find out that the head of the Vice Squad did not report to the police chief. He reported directly to the mayor, who was elected for a 2-year term.
Meanwhile, Chelsea was suffering the post-urban blues, the emigration of the old European working class to smarter suburbs, taking with them businesses and the tax base, and an immigration of people, legally and illegally, from all the world's poorest places. And on top of that, there was Chelsea's special way of doing business.
Here we had Budweiser coming in to build on a piece of land that had been vacant probably since 1908, okay? Although there were, just sheds on it. And Budweiser comes in and says, we're going to build. Now, one of the aldermen comes in and he says, you can't build here. The fire chief would come down and say there could be a fire hazard. The building chief could come down and say this land could be contaminated.
Everybody had his hand
The
out.
mayor would come down and say there's going to be a lot of problems. And the more problems, the better, because then you had to have more money to facilitate the whole thing and get it done.
Budweiser went elsewhere, and Chelsea continued its downward spiral, feeding off a dwindling public trough. The city's utilities gas pump was losing 15,000 gallons a year to personal use. Everything had gone to hell.
We had $2.5 million of unpaid sewer and water charges. And the solution's real simple. Again, you don't have to hire consultants to tell you. Shut people's water off. Now, we didn't shut off residences because we were afraid of health problems, but we shut off the water to the businesses that hadn't paid their water bills. And the checks started, people were running up the stairs of City Hall to pay their water bills.
What else did you do?
They had crazy things going on in Chelsea. For example, most city employees had clothing allowances. Clothing, people in the accounting department and everywhere had, matter of fact, we had a city attorney who worked here part-time, whose office was in Boston. And he got $600 a year for clothing allowance. And he never dressed that well, by the way, just for the record.
Jim Carlin stayed in the job for 11 months at a salary of $1. And when his time was up and he'd erased the deficit, he left.
Can you articulate what the city...
The new receiver, another outsider, is Louis Harry Spence, a Clark Kent type who brought in another Clark Kent as police chief. The state plans to build all new schools. A committee is rewriting the city charter. Businesses are showing interest in moving to Chelsea. Even Sammy Berkowitz is upbeat. He's promised to donate one of his buildings to the community.
Oh, yeah.
And Chelsea is still a dictatorship.
Sometimes democracy doesn't work. Sometimes you have to empower an individual or a couple individuals to come in and do what has to be done and do it fast. And maybe that's a crapshoot. If you get the wrong guy, I'd like to think I was the right guy.